Am I audible clearly?
Yes, sir. You're clearly audible.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, so very good morning. And today we begin the next content that we have for our presentation and for our discussion in the area of strategic management. The area is portfolio analysis and BCG matrix. So we will begin with this area first, portfolio analysis and BCG matrix. I'll just do a random introduction as we did in the last class, last session, and continue basically with the BCG matrix. Now, what is exactly portfolio analysis? You can see in this particular concept, and how portfolio analysis assists organizations in evaluating their business units or products to make informed decisions. Now, these decisions concern certain very basic aspects. They include resource allocation, analyzing the growth strategies, and finding out the market positioning. The BCG, or the Boston Consulting Group matrix, is one of the most well-known tools that are used for portfolio analysis and portfolio planning. We need to deeply analyze the relevance of portfolio analysis so that on the basis of the understanding of the portfolio analysis, we can assess the Boston Consultancy Group matrix. Now, what is the portfolio analysis all about? Portfolio analysis, as the name suggests, is a part of portfolio management, which involves assessment of an organization's collection of businesses or products, ultimately aimed at determining their relative strategic importance. The ultimate goal of resource allocation is about making strategic decisions that ultimately optimize the overall performance of the entire portfolio. The key elements of the portfolio analysis include assessment of business units, evaluating each business based on criteria which includes the market share, the market growth potential, and also the profitability. The second dimension is about resource allocation, and resource allocation includes assessment of business units where organizations can decide upon where to allocate resources in terms of growth, in terms of maintenance, or in terms of divestment. It also consists of strategic alignment with the portfolio, which helps in ensuring that the portfolio of business or products, they align with the organization's overarching strategic goals. So this is about portfolio analysis in the background, and from here we move ahead with what we call the concept of the Boston Consultancy Group matrix. The BCG matrix, developed by the Boston Consulting Group, is a widely used tool for the purpose of portfolio analysis. It categorizes business units or products essentially into 4 quadrants based on 2 key dimensions: market growth rate and relative market share. Okay, so there are 2 dimensions: market growth rate and relative market share. Now the BCG matrix, which we already discussed in the last session, would include the 4 dimensions in terms of the stars, the cash cows, the question marks, and the dogs. And these help firms to analyze how their portfolio should be managed in terms of the future. So everybody, every player, every product, every organization or company would like to be a part of the star category. And the star category would be something where high growth rate, high market share is witnessed. And products here can show or would show significant potential for growth, followed by the other 3 which we already have discussed, and based on it we can analyze how cash cows, question marks, or dog category portfolios ultimately can operate. Now, what is in essence the purpose of conducting the portfolio analysis or the purpose of doing the BCG analysis? Now, time and resource, time and money are important resources, and therefore we can understand here how much should we spend in terms of our best products and business units so that they can continue to be successful. What amount of money should we spend on developing costly products so that most of which in those terms will never be successful? And organizations, there is a term called pruning, line pruning and line extension. So let's say a company like ITC or Unilever, which has many products under its belt. So ultimately those products which won't show much of potential, organizations can get rid of them. That is also one more purpose for which these portfolio analysis and BCG matrix concepts can be utilized. Okay, we move ahead to the topic that we will start afresh: strategic planning. What do we mean by strategic planning, and why do companies engage in strategic planning, in strategic management, and what steps does strategic planning include? Because we can consider strategic planning to be what is a process. So in a way, strategic planning refers to a systematic and dynamic process which organizations may use to define their long-term goals. long-term goals that are meant for the future. Align resources. So resources also need to be aligned in terms of whatever planning we are doing, and chart a course ultimately that would lead to sustainable success for the firms. And strategic planning is an essential component of effective management. We can look at strategic planning as a dimension of strategic management which ultimately would lead to effective management and enable organizations to adapt to their changing environments and make the best use of opportunities that may arise. The strategic planning, like I said, is known as a process, and anything which is a process, it consists of several distinct stages which contributes towards the development of a well-crafted and actionable strategy. The first one includes environmental analysis, which is a comprehensive plan of action entailing examination of both the external and internal factors that would ultimately affect the organization's performance. The external factors here, which are very important, they include market conditions, competition, regulatory changes, economic trends, technological advancements, etc. Internal factors would encompass an organization's strengths, weaknesses, resources, and capabilities. So in the very first class, we talked about the SWOT analysis. So environmental analysis includes all those dimensions which are a part of the SWOT analysis of the firm. Now, these strengths and weaknesses, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses, are also in terms of analyzing the internal capacity, the power of performance of the firm, which areas it can aid in terms of decision making and long-term success. So at one stage we have the external factors, and in another stage we have the internal factors. So the strategy formulation here, as a part of any kind of strategic planning, we have strategy formulation, which is definitely a part of long range planning, and involves developing a corporation's mission, objectives, strategies, and policies. It begins with a situation analysis, considering a fit between the external opportunities and the internal strengths, how the external opportunities and internal strengths can be aligned with one another, and what are the core capacities that one has to consider the competencies that an organization would require. Strengths are powerful tools of dealing with the environmental opportunities, but the weaknesses being internal factors, they need to be corrected. Threats are non-controllable factors, and therefore one has to get rid of those threats, rather wait for those threats to become an opportunity before it can again lead to better organizational performance. Mission and vision statement and the way the environmental analysis is completed. Organizations tend to revisit or develop their mission and vision statements. A mission statement would clarify the organization's purpose and values, while the vision statement outlines where the organization aspires to be in the future. These statements should provide a guiding framework for all kinds of strategic decisions and actions. Overall, that is meant for the long-term needs of the organization. Goal setting, setting goals for the future in terms of attainment of clear, measurable and attainable goals for ultimately that is directed at the future. Goals refer to specific objectives that organizations would ultimately aim, and the aim is over a certain period of time, a defined time period, and obviously these goals need to be aligned with the organization's mission and vision, and in the long run should be able to address the goals which an organization ultimately is expected to achieve over a period of time. Any strategic planning ultimately becomes successful when they are formulated, when they are implemented, when they are executed. And it is at this stage that organizations would develop strategies that would aim at achievement of those goals. And these strategies would involve defining a set of actions, resource allocations, and approaches that leverage the organization's strengths to address weaknesses and capitalize on opportunities, ultimately to mitigate the threats. Here, the various strategic models and tools that may be employed in this process may include SWOT analysis, Porter's 5 forces model, and PESTEL analysis. Action planning. Once various strategies are formulated, organizations may create action plans that outline the steps which are required to implement those strategies. These plans can be specific in terms of guidelines, timelines, responsibilities, and resource allocations. The action plans also would make the strategy actionable, as well as they can provide a roadmap or direction for the achievement of those goals. Goals that are targeted or oriented towards the future, and implementation. Once the action plans are implemented, formulated, the next step is their implementation. And implementation would refer to the stage where formulated strategies are ultimately put into concrete actions. They may include execution of the action plans. You know, the strategy implementation stage is extremely important. After the strategy is formulated, it has to be assessed as to whether the strategy can be implemented in terms of the directions. The implementation of new strategies and policies, they call for better chances of making human resource management operate from the perspective of priorities. And also from the use of its personnel, and any sound implementation strategy would be dependent greatly on leading purpose. Leading would involve specifying clear performance objectives and promoting a team-oriented corporate culture. The company ultimately stresses promotion from within and every enterprise, including the top executives, they start from any level of implementation from within. So successful implementation here would also require effective communication, leadership, and commitment. The commitment from all levels of the organization. Number 7 is the next step, monitoring and evaluation. So once a certain strategy is selected, it is essential to monitor the strategy so that the actual results of the same can be evaluated in the context of the desired objectives that it seeks to achieve. And here we have the KPIs, the key performance indicators, which may be used to assess whether the organization is on track and is ultimately able to meet its goals. The deviations or shortcomings, whatever, they need to be identified and ultimately necessary adjustments need to be made to the strategy or in terms of implementing its action plans. Adaptation and feedback. Strategic planning rests on, or it can be successful only when there is an iterative nature, because we operate in a dynamic environment, and therefore we have to constantly track the changes that are happening, and organizations may be willing to refine their strategies based on conditions that are important to make adjustments to the strategy or in terms of the action plans. So ultimately, when these strategies are refined, regular feedback is important here. So in terms of both the conditions, we need to adapt, we need to refine strategies. There are regular feedback that can come back in terms of both the internal and external organization. We adapt to it, remain responsive and agile in a very evolving landscape, a landscape which is very much changing in terms of its dynamism, that also organizations need to very clearly adapt. How do we look at the process of strategic planning? It is a dynamic and essential process for organizations who wish to thrive and succeed in the long term. The stages in strategic planning, which begins right from the stage of environmental analysis, ultimately to adaptation and feedback, which also would involve formulating a structured approach to the crafting and executing a well-informed and flexible strategy. So that is where it is important and essential. By following these stages, organizations ultimately can make informed decisions. They can allocate their resources effectively and also navigate the complexities of the business environment. Ultimately, that is in consonance with the mission statement and the vision statement of the organization. So this is in a nutshell the stages that we looked for in the process of strategic planning. Now the next topic that we have is, what are the alternatives in strategic planning, and how does it help an organization to define its direction and make informed decisions? Now, strategic planning would be a vital process that would help organizations to define their direction and make informed decisions to achieve their long-term objectives and the traditional strategic planning would involve the development of a single focused strategy it is important to recognize that there are several alternative approaches that can be extremely valuable in key situations, which can also explore the concept of alternatives in terms of strategic planning, and what are the ways in which they can benefit the organizations at large. Now, what are the alternatives that we have in terms of the strategic planning process? Now, technically, any strategic planning would follow a linear path, and that straight line or linear path would involve various steps in terms of environmental analysis, goal setting, strategy formulation, action planning, implementation, and its ongoing monitoring and evaluation process. They would also result in a single overarching strategy that are intended or designed to address the organization's identified goals and challenges in the long run. The strategic planning process also would consider the process of managing the strategy to the manager and aligning it with the organization at large. So, the various alternatives that can be considered in the context of strategic planning would involve scenario planning, the context in which the strategies are formulated and need to be assessed. So, scenario planning. What is meant by scenario planning, and how does it operate, or how does it help in the strategic planning process? Now, any organizational action would begin with a fundamental brain work, homework with regard to the various scenarios, the alternatives, because selection of a strategy fundamentally would involve choice. And through the process of scenario planning, there are multiple future scenarios and their implications for the purpose of strategy development It would help organizations to prepare for a range of possible outcomes that are intended towards developing alternative strategies for different scenarios. This approach is particularly useful in highly uncertain or volatile environments such as various industries which are subject to rapid technological change or geopolitical. There are real options. The real option theory borrows concepts from financial options, trading to strategic planning. It encourages organizations to create flexible strategies that are dynamic and choice can be made with regard to that. So the most feasible option need to be chosen depending on the changing circumstances. This approach would also recognize that not all decisions must be made immediately, and the value of waiting for more information, waiting here would mean seeking more information, can be significant. Third option is the portfolio strategy, and it focuses on a single all-encompassing strategy. There are ways in which organizations may adopt a portfolio approach to strategic planning. Now, this also greatly would involve dealing with different strategic business units, managing multiple business units or projects independently, each with its own strategic direction in terms of goals and in terms of resources. The portfolio strategy would enable diversification and risk mitigation. So, what are the ways in which they involve or deal with the various kinds of risks that are encountered? The next step would be to deal with agile and iterative planning. Now, we are operating in dynamic industries, rapid changing industry, organizational markets. So one has to consider an agile and iterative approach. So organizations should employ shorter planning cycles and adapt their strategies very frequently in response to the new information that is obtained and the feedback. This approach would greatly promote flexibility as well as responsiveness. Another dimension is the management of core competency, which tries to concentrate on the organization's unique strengths and capabilities rather than pursuing a broad range of opportunities. It focuses on leveraging the core competencies that they have in order to excel in a specific area. This approach is also suitable for resource constrained organizations where resource constraints exists, and the way we can deal with the resource constraints that are present. What are the benefits? Exploring the various strategic alternatives, because which strategy works in which context, whether there is a problem with any particular division or it is up to the entire firm, employees, resources, these all change. So what are the ways in which these alternatives or options can be explored? Now, the first benefit of exploring alternatives is about mitigation of risk. The risk mitigation can be considered to be an alternative planning approach, which also can facilitate reduction of risk to a great extent, managing the risks which organizations are faced with, particularly the uncertainties, the changes, or the turbulence in terms of the market volatility. So when one can consider the uncertainties of the environment, then changes with regard to that can be better managed or better dealt with. Number two is adaptability. The various ways in which one can acclimatize to the changing conditions, which ultimately would allow organizations to adapt to the evolving situations, the situations which are very fast changing out, and ultimately make the strategic decisions that align with the changing conditions. Number three, innovation. So the innovation here is about the alternative planning methods, which would often encourage in terms of innovative thinking, leading to new solutions and approaches. Number four is resource allocation, which includes how organizations can allocate resources that are more effective by considering the multiple approaches and the allocation of resources in the same manner accordingly. That ultimately would promote greater effectiveness. Number five is competitive advantage. The promotion of competitive advantage or competitive advantage as an alternative. So it can lead to unique strategies that offer competitive advantage. It can uncover untapped market opportunities and ultimately find out ways to differentiate them from that of its competitors. The differential competitive advantage that each company has becomes the basis of competition. So those organizations who enjoy greater competitive advantage are the ones that tend to gain the benefit from the various competitors that exist and the ways in which they can be utilized for the purpose of differentiation. The conclusion that emerges out of this discussion of strategic planning, how strategic planning aims at staying ahead in terms of the competitors, generating the strategy of marketing, finance, HR, which from a core competence, ultimately we move towards developing a core capability. So traditional strategic planning is a robust and established process, though it may not always be the most suitable approach for every organization or situation, and it is extremely essential that one has to explore the various alternatives in terms of strategic planning, which can help organizations to become more adaptable and better equipped to manage risks, and also be innovative in terms of their approach. It allows organizations to tailor their strategies to the specific challenges and opportunities they ultimately face, which increases their chances of success in a dynamic and competitive business environment. So, identifying competencies above or superior to that of the competitors may be termed as distinctive competency, and three factors, three conditions need to be satisfied with regard to that. It must make a disproportionate contribution to customer perceived value. It must provide uniqueness. It must be superior to its competitors, superior to the competitor capabilities, and there should be extendability. It must be something that can be ultimately utilized to develop new products or services, or even enter into the new markets. So let's say Honda carefully extended its expertise in small motor manufacturing from motorcycles to autos and ultimately to lawnmowers. Xerox, the famous Xerox Corporation, they grew on the basis of its original copying patent. Whirlpool bought a worldwide distribution system when it purchased from Philips Appliance division. It must be shared with another business unit or alliance partner. Apple worked with the design to create the appeal of its Apple II and Mac computers. It must be carefully built and accumulated over time within the company, and Honda carefully extended its expertise in small motor manufacturing. So that also became the distinctive competence. Moving ahead, we move to the 10th module in the syllabus, which is strategy formulation. Now, strategy formulation would also involve strategic choice, because any company, if it has to formulate a well-designed strategy, it has to choose the most ideal one, because strategy formulation is a pivotal component of the strategic management process. It refers to the stage at which organizations play a key role in analyzing their internal and external environments. It helps in defining their long-term objectives which they intend to achieve, and determine their best approach to achieving them. Effective strategy formulation is essential for organizations ultimately to position themselves competitively and be adapt to the changing circumstances and ultimately succeed in their respective industries. They explore the significance and key elements of strategy formulation in terms of strategic management. Now, what is the significance of strategy formulation? Why strategy formulation is considered to be important? Strategy formulation plays a central role in strategic management process for several important reasons. Number one, it helps in goal setting, articulation of an organization's mission, vision, and goals. The goals which set the direction for the entire organization, and they provide a shared vision that guides in terms of decision making. So the resource allocation has to be done when we decide upon the functional strategy. Now, the next topic that we have definitely in terms of functional strategy is production strategy, supply chain strategy, marketing strategy, and the HR strategy. So functional strategy is basically an approach to the functional areas of business which is explored to achieve the corporate and business unit objectives and ultimately help in maximizing the resource productivity. It is concerned with developing and nurturing a distinctive competence to provide a company or business unit with a competitive advantage. Just as a multi-divisional corporation has several business units, each with its own business strategy, each business unit has its own set of departments, each with its own functional strategy. And the orientation of the functional strategy is dictated by its parent business unit's strategy. For example, a business unit following a competitive strategy of differentiation through high quality, which would ultimately need a manufacturing functional strategy that emphasizes upon quality assurance, high volume production, human resource functional strategy, hiring and training of a costly and skilled workforce, and a marketing functional strategy that emphasizes upon a distribution channel pull using advertising to increase consumer demand over push using ultimately promotional allowances that intrigue the retailers. So the basic level of goal strategy and then the resource allocation part. Looking at the competitive advantage that strategy formulation would help, we have also discussed about the core competencies and how organizations find out the areas of core competency so that the best chances of success should be built that are residing upon the core functional area. If a corporation does not have a distinctive competency, the functional area should be a candidate for outsourcing. The sourcing decision ultimately where the functions should be housed. So where is that sourcing area, the geographical location, and if the HR, the personnel has to be outsourced, then there are certain factors which need to be considered in terms of the company's or business unit's core competencies, ensuring that the core competencies are being strengthened, and also to manage the competencies in a way that best preserves the competitive advantage that the firms may be able to create. What are the key elements that strategy formulation would take into account? The first key element that it involves is environmental analysis. So environmental analysis helps in embarking on a strategy formulation, ultimately that helps in conducting a comprehensive environmental analysis. It includes assessing the external environment of the firm also, and conducting a comprehensive analysis this includes assessment of the external environment, including market trends, competitors, regulatory changes, and technological advancements. Also, the internal factors that need to be evaluated. This ultimately would foster organizations to identify their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, as well as their internal capabilities and limitations which at any point of time organizations are faced with. SWOT analysis the essential tools in strategy formulation is the SWOT analysis. This helps organizations to clarify their internal strengths and weaknesses, and also identify external opportunities and threats. It serves as the foundation for crafting strategies that leverage on the strengths, address the weaknesses, capitalize on opportunities, and mitigate the threats. A competitive strategy organizations also help in distinctly identifying their competitive strategy for the same purpose. And there are different options. Porter's generic strategies which deals with identifying whether they should pursue cost leadership, whether they should pursue differentiation or focus. And these are distinct generic strategies that any organization at any point of time should be involved in performing. And cost leadership would involve being the low cost manufacturer. Differentiation, it can be product differentiation, non-product differentiation, and focus can be cost focus or differentiation focus. So which of these strategies are competitively superior, and firms would focus on doing that. We have the strategic objectives in terms of pursuing the SMART goals, or what we call the SMART objectives, and choosing the competitive strategy which would help an organization ultimately to establish its strategic objectives. The strategic objectives need to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Ultimately, that should aim at guiding the organization's activities and assess their progress. What are the methods of resource allocation? Organizations should allocate the resources based on the chosen strategy and objectives. Here, there is a method of effective resource allocation which would be crucial for implementing the strategy very successfully, and that would greatly include financial investments, human resource investments, technological investments, and also investments in terms of the other assets that are present. Number 6, the action plan. Strategy formulation would culminate in the creation of action plans. The action plans would outline the specific steps, activities, and timelines that are necessary for achieving the strategic objectives. These plans, in the long run, would serve as a roadmap for the organization and provide a clear path for its implementation. Now, we have the different forms of strategy formulation and how they can be used in the various ways in which it can be aligned to organizations' strategies and structures. So the conclusion here in terms of the strategy formulation process is strategy formulation is the cornerstone of strategic management, which provides the direction and framework for an organization's activities. It involves a thorough analysis of the forces of internal and external environment, the identification of competitive strategies, and articulation or definition of specific objectives. Ultimately, the effective strategy formulation is crucial for achieving competitive advantage, adaptability, and long-term success. Strategies also need to be clearly crafted. Organizations can navigate the complexities of the business environment as well as realize their mission and vision that are important in staying responsive to evolving challenges as well as the opportunities that come in the way. The second module of this chapter is about structuring of organization and how it is associated with implementation or the strategy. Now, strategy is the means to an end, which, if carefully selected and done, will guide an organization towards its goals and objectives. And developing a well-crafted strategy is just half the battle. Successful execution depending on the organization's structure and how it aligns with the strategy. Now, what are the ways in which an organization's structuring can be made complete? Through a complex process that would involve aligning of resources, to ensure that the strategy so the alignment of the strategy in its efficiently and effectively, which would explore the key elements and considerations that are involved in structuring an organization for the purpose of strategy implementation. The key elements of organizational structure for the purpose of strategy implementation will include clear communication and alignment, that's the first step. Everyone understands and aligns itself with the strategic objectives. The strategy should be clearly communicated throughout the organization, from the leadership team down to every employee. This alignment would ensure that everyone is working towards the same goals. There is leadership and accountability. Effective leadership is critical for strategy implementation, because leadership is what would take an organization forward. Whether it is the marketing strategy, product development. So the leadership part is very important, or it can be the financial strategy, which would attempt to maximize the financial value that any firm would end up in providing. So that is also an element of the organizational structure. Organizations need leaders who can provide the direction, motivate teams, and also help individuals for their roles. So leadership should set an example of commitment. So commitment to the strategy, so leadership ultimately should set an example of commitment. So the roles and responsibilities would include assigning specific roles and responsibilities so that every aspect of the strategy can be addressed effectively. So each team member need to identify their roles in the strategy implementation process. This would include the defining or identifying the decision-making authority, the reporting structures, the cross-functional coordination that exists, etc. The resource allocation. Proper resource allocation is crucial to ensure that the strategy receives the necessary financial, human, and technological resources. Budgets need to be aligned with the strategic priorities, and every team should have the resources to carry out their tasks. Number 5, cross-functional collaboration. Many strategies involve dealing with the multiple departments that operate within the or functions within the same organization, and there has to be a structuring the organization to facilitate cross-functional collaboration that is vital for seamless implementation. Cross-functional teams can address challenges and opportunities more effectively by combining their expertise. Number 6, performance measurement, establishment of key performance indicators, KPIs, and the other metrics that are necessary to track the progress of each financial R&D operation strategy. So R&D strategy for any firm is the basis of any innovation, process improvement. It can be in terms of product, it can be in terms of process, it can be in terms of dealing with new technology, dealing with the internal development, dealing with the external acquisition, or through the various strategic alliances that organizations need to foster. So these KPIs, these are essential or important that are needed to evaluate the success of the strategy. Regular monitoring and reviewing these metrics would also allow the organization to make the necessary adjustments as and when needed. What are the considerations for creating effective organizational structure? The culture of the organization should align with the strategy. A culture that values innovation, adaptability, and customer centricity. So innovation, adaptability, and customer centricity they need to be encouraged, as these elements are key components of any strategic management process. Change management, strategy implementation would require management of change. They need to have the effective change management processes, ultimately to minimize resistance and ensure a smooth transition. Flexibility and adaptability. The organizational structure should be flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances and evolving strategies. Rigid structures can hinder agility and responsiveness. Number 4, training and development. Strategy implementation may require employees to acquire new skills or knowledge. Organizations should invest in training and development to empower their workforce so that they can meet the demands of the strategy. Number 5, continuous improvement. Regularly reviewing and fine-tuning the organizational structure is essential. Organizations should encourage a culture of continuous improvement to ensure that the structure remains aligned with the evolving strategy. So, what does structuring an organization for effective implementation include? It includes consideration of communication, leadership, essentially for managing marketing, HR, role allocation, careful performance measurement. It aims at defining an organization that is well structured for the purpose of strategy implementation, and it is better equipped to adapt to the changing conditions, respond to challenges, and achieve its strategic objectives. The alignment of organizational structure with the strategy is a key determinant of an organization's success if it has to remain in a dynamic and competitive business environment ahead of others. Now, strategic choice in any implementation would involve selection of the best strategy, the most feasible alternatives, and constructing the strategy based on the agreed upon objectives, competencies, societal trends, the company situation, based on the construction of scenarios. The management's attitude towards risk and the dealing with the process of strategic choice. Development of policies that would define the guidelines for the implementation of the strategy and identify its success in a dynamic and competitive business environment. So this is all about the structuring of organization for the implementation of strategy. I shall quickly glance through some of the important presentations that I think would be relevant. Strategy implementation. This is what I want to show, what strategy implementation is all about and what it aims at doing in terms of plan execution, achievement of the long-term goals within the organization, the areas in which the firm would develop, and it is a technique through which it utilizes and integrates new processes into the structure of an organization. The process of strategy implementation would help in building an organization that possesses the capability to put the strategies into action successfully, supplying resources in sufficient quantity to strategy essential activities, developing policies which encourage strategy. Such policies and programs are employed which helps in continuous improvement, combining the reward structure for achieving the results, and using strategic leadership. So strategic plan, evaluation and control. Strategic plan, there are 3 steps: project implementation, procedural implementation, and resource allocation. That is all about the objectives part. The strategies part, the management of change and leadership, structural implementation and leadership implementation. They come under the managing change part, and the achievement of effectiveness for functional implementation and operational implementation. They come under the evaluation and control part. So there are 3 steps in this structure. Now, strategy implementation is about positioning forces before the action. Strategy implementation is managing forces during the action. Strategy formulation focuses on effectiveness, and strategy implementation would focus on efficiency. So there are 4 steps in the nature of strategy implementation. There is a diagram to explain how the strategy implementation process works. The vision, the strategy, the implementation plan. The implementation plan has 3 dimensions: accountabilities, deadlines, and ownership. It specifies and it acts. Specifies on the ownership and acts on the monitoring system. there is an adjustment in the strategy implementation process as well. The model of strategy implementation, it's a basic generic model, project implementation, procedural implementation, and ultimately resource allocation. So, structural leadership and behavioral implementation. Achieving effectiveness and functional and operational implementation. So any plan ultimately would lead to evaluation. Strategic plan ultimately leading to the evaluation dimension. The process of dividing up and distributing available limited resources to competing alternatives uses that satisfy unlimited needs and wants. That is what allocation is all about. Strategic plan, program plan, assessment. So implementation plan in terms of financial forecasts, budget projections, annual budget development, execution and assessment. Factors affecting resource allocation in healthcare. Just as an example of how knowledge and activity is eligible and how it is done. Structural implementation, vertical differentiation, horizontal differentiation. What are the ways in which structure and strategy can be matched? Reasons for changing structure. Structure dilates how policies and objectives will be established. Structure dilates how resources will be allocated. Example, customer groups. The structure might be suitable only for 91 firms. Growth of an organization will lead to changes in structure, and structure can shape choices of strategies. Four very common techniques of strategic evaluation and control are used, which we call operational techniques and strategic techniques. The types of strategic control would include premise control, implementation control, strategic surveillance, and special alert control. Emerging trends and analytical cases. increased strategic partnership with market research firms, growth in technology automation, increased online collaboration among stakeholders, increase in commoditization of services, and growth in offshoring. New external environment of business, new directions in strategic thinking, redesigning the organization, and changing role of managers. So we were just talking about the operational employment relationship, how structure and strategy need to be matched, how structure, strategy, and culture need to be assigned, structure in terms of production system design, strategy in terms of management philosophy, HR system, quality of working life, culture need to be adjusted with the type of leadership, and employee involvement or engagement. Matching structure with strategy, reasons for changing organizational structure in terms of customer groups, institutional plans, strategic plans, program plans, assessment and implementation can include the financial forecasts, the budget projections, the annual budget development, and the execution in terms of assessment. Last thing we will discuss is we were talking of resources and capabilities and distinctive competencies. That is a part of our discussion on strategy and its formulation. So what are the firm-based strategies in terms of resources, both tangible and intangible? How do they arise from the capabilities and resources, brand names, company reputation, and intellectual property? And what are the ways in which the strategic resources can be combined? And how the asset, which is a valuable, rare, and difficult, and a non-substitutable unit is also achieved. How can resources be evaluated? What type of resources can contribute to the development of competitive advantage? How can resources and capabilities be evaluated, and how can resources and capabilities be developed and managed for long-run sustenance? So, or the resources refer to what an organization owns, what the organizations can do, and what capabilities they can offer to bundle, manage, and exploit resources in a manner that ultimately can lead to what it offers to its competitors. Tangible resources, organizational capabilities, the way it leads to success. Strategic analysis is also a part of this, conducting research by the company and operating in an environment to formulate a strategy. So the definition of strategic analysis may differ from academic or business perspective, but in general it deals with the data that is relevant to the company's strategy, defining the internal and external environments that is analyzed, and using several analytical methods, which we have already discussed in the past, mainly the Porter's 5 forces model, which is an important part of the SWOT analysis. The levels in which the strategic analysis operates: external environment to current strategy, internal environment to current strategy, assessment of strategy, strategic alternatives, recommendation, assessments of goals and future performance. Also here is a part of the level of strategic analysis. Planning, tracking and managing tools are all techniques of strategic analysis, which we will do in the next class. Next class we will take up the next portion of the module, which is strategic business unit, SBUs, business process re-engineering. What are the methods in which business processes are re-engineered? Management control, operational control and task control, and goal congruence of the organization at large. And in the last session we will take up the digital strategy and the use of internet as a tool in terms of strategic management. Now there are some one or two more areas that I need to discuss, particularly for examination related questions, and those are in terms of what is meant at the by the functional strategy, what are the areas of structuring for the implementation of strategy, what are the strategic business units, and particularly the analysis of the business environment in the context of PESTEL, in the context of value chain, SWOT, Porter's 5 forces model, SWOT-C analysis, that is important, then the BCG matrix, the stages in strategic planning, and the various alternatives that are used for the purpose of strategic planning. These are the areas that are important for so far as the examination questions are concerned, and students are expected to be well prepared for these areas. Okay, so with this I come to a conclusion of today's session. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Rehan, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, my part is over.
Okay, sir. I am conclude the session, sir. I'm going to conclude the session.